And our top story this hour, the ANC National Working Committee meeting recently had to consider a number of critical issues, among others the erstwhile Public Protector's State of Capture report. The opposition is using the inconclusive report as the basis for the removal of President Jacob Zuma. Meanwhile, dissenting voices within the ANC are also on the rise. While the ANC battle internal factions, the DA is being touted as the vanguard alternative to the ruling party. And joining us to interrogate these issues is ANC Deputy Secretary General, Comrade Jessie Duarte. Welcome and thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you very much.
Might I add, you look very lovely today.
Thank you, and so do you.
Okay, let's just talk about the very pressing issue of the State of Capture report that the DA and other opposition parties have used as a basis to recall the president. What is your stance as the ANC on this?
Well, we don't believe the report is a final report and that she has made some suggestions which cannot be finalized because she's calling, amongst the things she's asking for, is a judicial commission of inquiry based on the Gupta family only. The National Working Committee did discuss the report, and our view is that, firstly, all those implicated in the report have a right to judicial review based on the fact that they were not actually given an opportunity to raise their side of the story, which is really a fundamental in our law. Secondly, that the question of who calls for commissions of inquiry in the Constitution of the Republic of South Africa, that is a prerogative of the President of the Republic, and that would include who's appointed as a judge and so on. However, having said all of that, we believe that anything we discuss is premature until there is a review, and we've understood there is going to be a review, and recall ideas for the recall of the President and the many other calls that the DA are using the judiciary rather incorrectly for is really not correct, is premature.
Okay, but let's just go back to those implicated who were not given adequate time to respond to questions, and juxtapose that with the audio tape that was released where the erstwhile Public Protector had said she kept it and deliberately released it to prove the point that the President was given
I think it's not just about answering her questions. It's also the ability to ask questions of those making accusations. And really, that is the crux of the matter. If you reduce it to the President didn't, well, he was given a chance to answer questions, and he got to answer the questions. The point is that people have made accusations to him. He has a right to question through his lawyers or ask questions of those people through his legal team or directly, and that's what the Act, the Public Protectors Act prescribes. That didn't happen, and the ruling, the basis of our law is exactly that: the right to cross-examine an accuser is a fundamental right. And so, if you take away that right, aren't you being incorrect in applying principal standards of the law? And so, we're not really arguing technically. We're saying, if Ms. Madonsela had just given people adequate time and an opportunity, instead of rushing through this particular investigation as if there was no office of the Public Protector and only her, we may be at a very different point at the moment, because the Public Protector's office could have continued with the investigation.
Well, you may say that, it was under her tenure and that, this is a case that was very prominent and needed to be concluded. But I want to go back to what the political fallout has been of the State of Capture report, that many dissenting voices within the party and the veterans and stalwarts calling for the ANC to do the right thing and for Jacob Zuma to resign. Does this give you the impetus as an organization to really self-correct and restore the ANC to its former glory?
Well, what has happened with us is that immediately after the election in August, we had a 4-day NEC meeting in which we thoroughly discussed what would have been the causes of us having the dramatic drop in our voter share that we did have. And where did that come from and what occasioned it? One of the things we said was the negative press around the president and the negativity around the president is certainly one objective factor. Secondly, we said that we must admit that with local government elections, people don't really vote for big political issues. They vote for their local street issues, and if service delivery hadn't happened in their street, that was going to be a factor. We also analyzed the fact that within our organization, when we looked at, let's take Port Elizabeth or Nelson Mandela Bay Municipality, for instance, we took Danny Jordan in a little too late, we believe. That particular area had ongoing conflict between the REC and a PTT, an RTT or a task team that we had put in place. And people were really fighting about who should lead the ANC instead of concentrating on doing electioneering work. Also in Tshwane, similarly. I think the exception is Johannesburg, where approximately 300,000 ANC voters did stay away. About a week or two before the elections, we started hearing rumors that people were saying, well, Joburg is going to put up the rates, they're going to do this, they're going to do that. Wrong information, but it did have an impact, especially in Soweto, on the lives of people. So we've examined objectively that, but primarily the meddling with the lists by structures of the ANC as to who should become a councillor and so on caused a great deal of unhappiness throughout the country. And that did create a trust deficit for the ANC within our organization itself. What we've been doing since then is we've been meeting the regions of the ANC. And we've done a build-up of ensuring that people correct what they can correct. Also, we're going through traditional ANC mechanisms of looking at how we select leadership. We're saying very openly, start talking about who should, not who should lead us, but what kind of a leader we need.
But do you think that this, your strategy of war, if yes, for lack of a better term, is working? Because generally in the public discourse, it seems that the DA is touted and positioned as the altruist alternative to the ruling party. If the Nkandla Gate saga is not anything to go by, the learnings that the ANC needs to consider, especially when it comes to the state of capture report, that you know, the teachings of the Concord outcome is that the public protector's report is final.
I think there are many lessons that we've learned in the last 4 years, 5 years. One of those is that tackle corruption without hesitation and no excuse about it. Deal with it. Secondly, be cautious about people claiming that people are corrupt simply because they want to get rid of them, and building a case of corruption that will go to court, that will damage a person's reputation. In fact, it's politically cause a person to not cease to exist almost, and you build up that case. We have learned that lesson, that we don't do that. It also affects our constituency. As for the DA being a vanguard, you know, a vanguard is an institution with vision and long-term mission, and historical proof that they can lead. Unfortunately, the ANC, and my own personal view is, discussing the DA is a waste of time for our country, because we can see what they've done in the Western Cape is they are a maintenance organization. What happens is they move in and they maintain. They do not develop. And they certainly do not develop black communities. And they certainly do not have a program for developing our country. They have a critique of whatever the ANC does. And that is not a plan. I think that you can't claim them to be a vanguard. Unfortunately, I have to say that. Many people, yes, as we have a growing black middle class, will see the DA as interesting. Many people will see the financialization of our country as very interesting. But development is a very important reality for us, and the DA is not an answer. Frankly speaking, they didn't grow in the last election. Our voters didn't go out to vote. They didn't win any metro outright. They're governing everywhere with coalitions. So I don't think we can really call them a vanguard.
All right, but I just want to go back in the enemy within, and this is what even the ANC would admit, that the brand and the strength of the party is eroded because of the internal squabbles and the factions. Zuma camp against Cyril Ramaphosa camp. There's now apparently a list out to discuss for the succession plan in the elective conference next year. All of these nuances are not falling on deaf ears, in that, you know, the constituencies and South Africans in general are looking and saying, where is the leadership? What is going on with the ANC?
Well, you know, every 5 years we go through the same saga in the ANC, where people begin to write up lists that they make up in the dark somewhere, where people begin to find money to buy votes and buy regions and buy provinces. Yeah, our position is very clear. And the reason we're going to every region is to tell them not to accept any list that does not come from the branch and originates from branch structures of the ANC, to discuss the caliber of leadership that we want instead of a list of leaders at this stage. We still have a policy conference to go to, where we will then map out the ANC's program for the next 5 years, and that program will determine what caliber of leadership we need. We're also saying, look, we know that people are putting out lists. We know that there's a rumor going around that the president and the deputy president are not working together. We sit with them every Monday, and these two people talk to each other in a very cordial manner and are working together as we speak. But there will be a consistent effort to try to divide people. Yes, there are voices in the ANC that are not happy. We accept and acknowledge that. We'll be meeting a group of those voices on Monday. Hopefully we will listen to what they have to say, and hopefully they will have analyzed the situation as we have analyzed it.
Okay, let's just talk about the agenda points on the elective conference next December, and I'm sure there'll be other national working committee meetings, particularly when it comes to the ramifications of the State of Capture report. Number one, we saw the resignation of Brian Molefe. He's now facing criminal charges laid by the DA, and also President Jacob Zuma facing similar criminal charges based on the same report. How are you planning to deliberate on this, and what outcome can we expect?
Our elective conference and our policy conference will certainly look at corruption and how we undermine it, absolutely and thoroughly. However, our elective and policy conference does not look at individuals. We will look at the primary top-of-mind issues, job creation, whether or not the national minimum wage can be implemented speedily. We will look at questions of the education issues in our country, which have certainly been in the front space and top of mind for a while now. What do we do about higher education and progressively moving towards getting it to be free? We will look at geographic development of our country and how we can spatially undermine apartheid's developmental infrastructure that exists at the moment. Of course, there will be tempers that are going to be raised about the State of Capture report and so on, but I would doubt very much that that would be the primary reason for us to meet with over 4,000 delegates in June and in December next year. We will meet to look at our organization as we are doing now.
Okay, the Apex issues aside, but just your view on how you see Brian Molefe's resignation, with many calling it an act of guilt.
I doubt that. You know, when you live in a family and people call you corrupt, and you've got to go and explain to your children, your wife, your mother, your father, what that means, it takes a toll on people. And here is a person who actually took Eskom out of a crisis and managed it extremely well. And he is hounded out of his space by a State of Capture report that is inconclusive, and hounded out of his space by the Democratic Alliance. Now, my own view is that the DA will go for any South African that is productive, that is progressive, is a supporter of the ANC, and is black. The DA has yet to show that they will take on people who are doing similar things elsewhere, but they are liberal-minded people and they support the DA. Let's see how this will frame out. I think it's a tragedy, frankly speaking, that somebody of the caliber of Molefe is forced to resign, and there is absolutely no charge against him at the moment. There's no court that has found him guilty of anything. There is a spurious thought about him having been in a space at a particular time a few times, and even that is questionable, whether or not it is correct for the BBC to be providing the public protector with spy information because they don't have the right to do so. Now, there's a lot of questions around this. I must say, as an individual, I'm quite concerned. And I'm also concerned for our country. I'm concerned that the next CEO that is doing a great job is going to be similarly targeted. Anyone who says no to big business might be targeted as well. Anyone who doesn't play the game of the big financial gurus might also be targeted. And I think these are things we need to discuss openly as a society. Is this what we want? Certainly it's not what I want.
So do you think that the DA's charges against President Zuma and Brian Molefe are frivolous, or that,
I think
that they're jumping the gun?
Why don't we wait for a judge to make a determination? The DA cannot be judges. They don't have the competence to do so. What they are is an opposition party using opportunistically any opportunity that they instigate, by the way, to make sure that the leadership of the ANC is denigrated. And this has been their modus operandi since 1994. Nothing has changed with these people. Nothing. They are still as they were in the 80s. Many of their leaders were supporting the destabilization of SADC. Many of their leaders were in the South African army operating in Angola. Now, I honestly don't see how these people can be called vanguards.
Yeah, but Comrade Jessie, the DAs or the EFF opposition are not the only critics of the ANC.
Yes.
We've recently the chief whip calling for the entire NEC to resign. And again, we've seen other erstwhile leaders, your Sipho Pikyanas, your former President Thabo Mbeki, the 101 CEOs marching, and the call to essentially get rid of President Jacob Zuma. So then how do you react to this leadership reform?
We can't run away from criticism. We can't run away from criticism within our organization, especially if we do it in a manner that enables us to find common solutions to a problem as ANC cadre. We also can't run away from the criticism of the EFF and the DA. They are the opposition in alliance with each other. The Chief Whip's remarks were discussed fairly thoroughly with himself, and I think I'm going to leave it there because that's an internal party matter. We're dealing with it. The issues around President Mbeki's letter, I must say the letter was a little bit disappointing in that President Mbeki tried to suggest that the ANC's leadership was an administrative collective, and that the real leadership were people who had struggled and suffered in exile. Many of the leaders of the ANC who never left the country suffered a great deal as well. So you can't use suffering as the litmus test for somebody's competency as a leader. What is the question is how well they do what they're doing. And I think that if we look at the voices of 101, they're now 106, led by the Reverend Frank Chikani, some of those people are not stalwarts, nor are they veterans. They were activists of the ANC in the 80s, some in the 90s, some fairly recently. These are people who were very expensive consultants amongst them, who may have not had their consultancies renewed by various government departments. There's anger there. Amongst them are people who were ambassadors, who were not returned as ambassadors. There's anger about that. There are genuine voices there, I must say. People who have raised really good issues that we will listen to. We're willing to listen to all of them, 101 of them, on Monday if all of them come. On the issue of Sipho Pichana and his outrageous behavior, one can only say that it must bother you that somebody uses a funeral platform to shout abuse at people, especially a person who's really speaking for business. Pichana has never actually been a leader of the ANC anyway. Yes, he's been a member of the ANC. He's also occupied very senior civil service positions. He was generally highly respected by members in the ANC, but I think he's trying to make himself known so that he could be elected into the NEC. I have no problem with that, but do it decently, Sipho. Do it decently. The ANC is not going to go away.
Yeah. No, but furthermore, just the role of civic organizations, NGOs like the Freedom Under Law, the Helen Suzman Foundation, the F.W. de Klerk Foundation, and so many other similar ones. In their criticism, what do you think their role is in criticizing the ANC?
There are thousands of NGOs and community-based organizations in this country. The fact that the media only picks 18 of those to interact with is rather unfair. So the media interacts with the right to know. You interact with the organizations that were formed by George Soros. You interact with the organizations that were formed by fairly wealthy individuals, all of them using one criteria, development of democracy. But within themselves, they're not very democratic organizations. The interesting thing about them, and our research shows, that they're all primarily funded from the same sources, either from Germany or the United States or the UK. Their funding organizations are very similar. We believe that we must protect the Constitution of South Africa as the African National Congress. We believe in that Constitution. It is our anchor. And when people say that they are defending the Constitution, then that's what they must do. What they cannot be allowed to do is to use the Constitution as a weapon to break down the African National Congress. We're going to stand firm. We're going to stand very firm, and we will meet all of them. We've met all the foundations that were created in the name of our veterans and our stalwarts. We're going to work for understanding and partnership. We're not going to work for antagonism and to become a victim of people that we don't know what their actual agenda is. We won't allow that.
Yeah, but also ensuring that the courts are not overreached, as you've seen now, many charges being laid. How does the ANC ensure then, moving forward, that you can deal with internal matters, deal with the movement's challenges without having to exercise it through the judiciary?
I think we're litigious, frankly speaking. We've become a very litigious
society
society in the last 20 years. We believe that we must test everything through a judge. Well, that might well be the view of some people, but for instance, Judge Dennis Davis cautions us that when you do that to the courts, you're actually weakening the courts. You're making the courts do the work of politicians. And when people cannot win an argument in Parliament, which is where the debates do take place, and they go to the court where they believe they will have a sympathetic ear, they're actually beginning to create the impression that the courts are biased. And that is something that we must all guard against, because the courts are what stands between us and anarchy.
Yeah. Speaking of prosecutions or litigation, just your final comment on Sean Abrahams and the call for him to resign. On occasion, you've lambasted the finance minister not to go, to get the warning statement saying that he's not above the law. And some might even argue that there's a conspiracy to oust him to get a more placid minister who will advance a certain agenda. What is your view?
No, I don't think anybody is above the law, not even me, none of us. Secondly, I think that we are beginning to weaken the National Prosecuting Authority. We must allow the National Prosecuting Authority to make the decision about whether or not a a charge will hold in court or not, and whether the legal prescripts of a charge are valid or not valid. And I think the DA is just jumping the gun as usual, because they've seen another arena that they can attack. I think that I'm hoping that Mr. Abrams will go to the president and give reasons why he should not be discharged. The president is following the correct prescript. We can't rely on the DA to follow the correct prescript. They never will. They're like little children who play with toys, and they're playing with our country. And we must all speak out against that. The National Prosecuting Authority is an important institution. It must be respected. And when it says it is not going to charge somebody, that must be respected. And one would hope that people understand that they would have done so after having reviewed the cases that are in front of them very cautiously.
All right, we're going to have to leave it there. Lovely having you in studio. Thank you so much. That's Jessie Duarte. She is the ANC Deputy Secretary General, reflecting on a myriad of issues that the party needs to reflect on.